Hey, Joe here. In this video, I want to listen to what the different EQs on the Presonus StudioLive Series 3 sound like. Now, to do this, it was just easier to show you on the software side versus on the screen itself on the mixer. If you're not familiar with this, this is the Universal Control app that's free with the StudioLive, and it's basically just a big old remote control for the mixer. So you can see if I move the faders from my DAW on my mixer, you can see the fader over here is moving as well. It's just meant to be kind of a mirror image. You can come in here and adjust names and do some other things, save scenes and things maybe a little bit easier on the computer. The software is completely not necessary. You don't have to have it, but I do use it quite a bit. Well, not a lot. I don't use it that much, but I am going to use it for this video because it gives me a little bit easier visual readout to show you. That was what I was worried about. You wouldn't be able to see what I was doing. So here's the EQ section on the StudioLive. This is the standard EQ. What we're going to do is I've got some drums playing over here in a drum loop. And I'm going to run those drums through the three different EQs just to get a quick listen for what it sounds like. So here's the standard EQ. We won't spend much time here. Let's just boost the lows and the highs and cut some of that mid-range and see what that sounds like. You'll notice it's not on. Let's turn it on first. All right, here we go. Pretty straightforward, right? There's not a lot of character there. It's just kind of doing its job and doing it just fine. We can get in, we could go find frequencies and get more narrow with it if we want to. But for the most part, that's kind of what, if I was dialing in like an overall drum mix sound on a mix, that's something I would probably use. All right, let's switch over to passive. This is the Pultec style sucker. Let's see what kind of sounds we can get out of this one. Well, that sounds awful because the boost was all the way up. Let's try that again. Okay. So let's do the same thing. Let's set the low frequency to something like 100. Let's make the bandwidth up kind of right in the middle, and the high frequency, let's say around 8K. And then let's do some boosting and cutting and see what happens. As I mentioned in the last video, I've not done a lot with this EQ. It's interesting. It does have a different sort of a sound to it. I've heard that boosting and attenuating at the same time can sound interesting. Let's try that. To my ears, it just sounds different, right? The standard EQ is pretty straightforward. Boosting the highs on this one doesn't get crazy. Like, we boosted it a ton. It doesn't get crazy, like harsh and shrill. It's still kind of pleasing, which is what's kind of cool about these passive, these analog EQs. You kind of can do anything, and none of them sound terribly bad, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the situation. But I like that it's got some options here. As I mentioned before, I'll definitely play with that one a little more, but that's interesting. Now here's my favorite one of the bunch. Let's turn it on. I really like the sounds I can get with this one. That's no EQ. I mean, it's got a punch to it, right? Again, there's no compressor here. There's no compressor on. We are literally just listening to EQ, and by a little bit of boost in the lows and the highs and a little cut in the mids, which I know is kind of smiley face EQ curve, but it works on drums a lot of the time. And you can hear it's kind of pleasant and it's kind of neat sounding. Go back to the standard EQ just for reference, do the same sort of thing, kind of some shelves and boosts, and you'll hear it still sounds okay, but it's not quite that same character we had before. Take a listen. You hear how that one feels really clean? And clean is great. A lot of times you want clean. We go back to this vintage one and do that same setting where we're cutting the mids, boosting the lows and the highs a little bit. Kind of the same. I mean, it's not exactly the same. This isn't a scientific thing at all. But looking at it, it's kind of the same sort of EQ curve, but it does sound different. The low end is a little more punchy. It's not as crisp sounding, even with the highs boosted, which I like. Again, hopefully you can hear, and I know it's hard to hear in these videos sometimes. Hopefully you can hear that one's not really better or worse. You may prefer the clean EQ to this one, but at least you can appreciate that there is a difference, and you have some different flavors to choose depending on what you're working on. As you try these things out, you'll find this EQ sounds great on drums, and you may not like it on vocals. Or you may, love it on piano and hate it on bass. Like those are all legit, but don't waste too much time experimenting, but do a little bit of experimenting and see kind of what you like and don't like about these, especially because they're built into the board and built into the fat channel in Studio One. If you have both, it would behoove you to test them out and see what you like.